This is your host, Gabe Morales, coming back at you with another informative episode, this time on what I feel are the top 10 California Mexican Mafia members of all time. This was a tough one, as La M has always had some seriously deadly and powerful individuals in it. I should know. I personally dealt with many of them. I'll start off with Luis Jesse Huerta Flores, who was born on August 16, 1940. The Mexican Mafia, or La M, dates back to late 1957 to 1958 and was founded by Hawaiian Gardens gang member Huerta Flores at the Dual Vocational Institute in Tracy, who was received at DVI on July 24, 1957, when he was only 17 years old. And he was not that big in size. I've heard some claim that the MA was never a protection group, but I don't know about that. Some of the individuals claiming this weren't even members until 15 years after they started, so I'm not sure how they would even know. Yes, they soon became feared. If Weddle Buff didn't need any homeboys running with him for protection in the joint, then he could have just stood alone. But definitely, Weddle Buff had an idea that was before its time. He decided to create a gang of gangs inside the penal institutions in California, and they soon became feared for taking out their opponents. But I highly doubt that this group started in July 1957. I've started several organizations, and it takes some time to get things going. It just doesn't happen overnight. So as soon as Weddle Buff hit the yard, I'm sure he looked around for some allies and started talking to them about his idea of creating a group similar to the Italian Mafia, but this would be called the Mexican Mafia, or La M. Eventually, he recruited about a dozen or so trusted homeboys. At one time, there were 13, then 14, 15. Then eventually, it grew into a couple of hundred members. The MA was supposed to be a blood-in, blood-out organization, meaning you usually had to kill to get in and usually had to die to get out. But there's always exceptions. I know some who were able to retire in good standings with seniority as long as they no longer meddled in MA business. And I know many who turned Christian who were left alone as long as they never debriefed to California Department of Corrections. In June 1991, Huerta Flores, by all accounts the founder of the Mexican Mafia, drank himself to death. He was probably brokenhearted by the death of so many of his carnales over the years, when that was not his original intention of the group. Yes, just like the Italian Mafia, they mostly kill their own. Rodolfo Cheyenne Cadena was born on April 15, 1943, and claimed Barrio Viejo in Bakersfield, but was later close to some East LA La Primera Flats gang members. Thus, the American Me movie theme is La Primera Ese. We don't fake it, we just take it. Cadena was also not that big for a Chicano. And by all accounts, he was a handsome teen from a well-known familia, but incarcerated for a murder that he's convicted of that occurred in 1958 in Bakers. And he actually didn't hit the yard in CDC until the trial was over around 1960. Robert Morell told me that he was informed by longtime investigative San Quentin Sergeant Bill Hankins that a large black convict tried to sex play Cadena, who killed this predator, which gained him instant respect out on the yard, and he was soon inducted into La M. Philip Rebel Neri from Bakersfield was hit by La M in 1968. And was very close to Nuestra Familia Mexicana founder Chalo Hernandez, who was from the same town, and was actually Shai's cousin. Shai was arrested during an attempt to take out Chalo, as was described in the Top NF episode Part 1. One interesting detail, per former Associate Warden and Deputy Director Tony Casas, now deceased, Cadena, who was called Cheyenne, went out with Neri's sister, and Neri went out with Cadena's sister, Cecilia. Casas should know. He pulled high-security prisoner Cadena out for ride-alongs outside prison walls to various programs. When he did this, he took Cadena out unchained, much to the dismay of other corrections officers. Once he asked Cadena while driving the Tejon Pass in Grapevine to Bakersfield, "Well, what shall we do now?" Cadena responded, "Well, you can kill me or I can kill you, or we could just get along." The ride went smoothly. In theory, all carnales in the Mexican Mafia are supposed to be of equal status, but in reality, some have always had more clout than others. This is called la palabra pesada, the heavy word. Recognized by his own and even by his rivals as a leader, Cadena was one of the first MA to study Nahuatl, and even gave Aztec names to many of his carnales. La MA still studies Nahuatl today and often communicates using this ancient language in code. Cadena and his Mexican Mafia supporters attempted to take over drug trafficking in Southern California, but also many of the rehabilitation programs that were getting federal and state funding to help Chicano addicts. This was all a ruse to run drug operations. Cadena sent out MA ambassadors out into the community in the 1970s with marching orders via paroled MA members. Sometimes he sent quoted messages to kill them, saying, "Sent to Fresno." Sorry, in all my time in corrections, I've never read one debrief or even heard of the term "sent to Brazil." Just saying. Since the September 1968 shoe war, dozens have been hit or killed on both sides. This bloody feud finally convinced CDC to arrange peace talks between the two prison gangs in the late 1960s to early 70s. A NF boxer by the name of Fast Eddie Valdez wrote to Cadena on September 16, 1972, the fourth-year anniversary of the shoe war. But the truce had already been broken in a November 1971 attack involving the NF and MA. Cadena's efforts to unite La Raza and fork out a peace treaty with the NF were not going very well. Since Juan Lips Valdez was now out of commission due to the early hit on him, as I covered in part 1 of the Nuestra Familia Top 10, Frank Joker Mendoza was the next main NF spokesman to be dealt with. Cadena was housed at Folsom Prison at the time, but pulled down to CIM Chino for peace talks with the NF in late October 1972. This was arranged by CDC so he could speak to Mendoza. Cadena had proposed that there be an inmate governing body consisting of 12 representatives for both the Mexican Mafia and West Familia factions, with one rep to be posted at each major CDC institution to lead to the road to liberation. Unfortunately, Cadena's pleas for his fellow inmate to cease fire did not work. On December 12, 1972, just days before the peace talk, NF member Mike Nolan was killed by the Mexican Mafia at San Quentin prison. And on December 15, 1972, Nuestra Familia members Santos and Ernie Aranda were both stabbed by Mexican Mafia members at Chino prison in a sally port leading to the yard at the California Institution for Men at Chino. This was the final straw, and the Nuestra Familia swore revenge. The violence was now out of Cadena's control. As official CDC reports show, Cadena did not walk calmly to his death, but was surprised attack, outflanked when he exited his cell. On December 17, 1972, at afternoon release, at approximately 13:05 hours, Cadena was attacked on the second tier in Palm Hall. He was stabbed 50 times and thrown over the tier by NF members Joker Mendoza and Manzanas Colon. NF supporter Refugio Tani Contreras jumped on Cadena after he hit the first tier, stabbed him some more, and took Cadena's watch as a personal prize. Others who were present during this incident were NF member Eddie Crackers Vindiola from Fresno, Hector Mad Dog Padilla, yes, the same one from the shoe war, and Joe Leakybird / Liquioso Varela Hernandez from Salinas. Mexican Mafia bodyguard Gilbert Sandoval rushed to Cadena's aid. He was also stabbed and thrown over the tier. Sandoval suffered severe head injuries and was taken to USC Medical Center. Cadena was soon pronounced dead by the San Bernardino County coroner and buried in his hometown of Bakersfield per his family's wishes. Joseph Radish Morgan was born on April 10, 1929. His father abandoned the family when he was young, and they moved to East LA into the area of Fort Maravilla, which is populated largely by Mexican and Mexican-American families. Many people today know the area for the popular King Tacos that is located off of 3rd and 4th Boulevard. Few people know Morgan had 3 sisters. One became the head of the local Department of Motor Vehicles, another had a career as a California Youth Authority probation agent, and another found work at USC Medical Center, as well as dated a sergeant employed with the Los Angeles County Sheriff's Department. When he was 16, Morgan played the role of Sancho with a married woman more than twice his age. Elvira Rojo wandered out of her marriage and talked her young lover, Joe Morgan, into a murder plot. Morgan beat the husband, Jose Rojo, to death with a hammer and attempted to bury his body near Malibu, California. Not long after that, he was arrested and put on trial in Los Angeles County for murder. Before the trial even started, Morgan escaped from custody in 1946 and remained a fugitive for several months before being recaptured. And it was not his last time escaping prison. Morgan lost his leg after being shot in a subsequent crime depicted in the 1992 movie American Me, although how it was shown is not how it actually happened. After the gunshot wound to his leg, Morgan is said to have refused medical treatment, and gangrene set in, and finally he lost his leg. Afterwards, police gave him the name to follow him for the rest of his life, Peg Leg, but this was not a name his friends called him. and nobody dared call him this to his face. Morgan became the youngest known person to ever be sentenced to San Quentin prison when he was only 17 years old. He paroled in the early 1950s and soon committed several robberies, including one in West Covina, California in 1955 that netted $17,000. He was captured in Long Beach shortly after that heist. Morgan escaped custody again in 1961 with several inmates at the LA County Jail and was recaptured 4 days later. Morgan was known to be a very good handball player, in spite of only having one good leg. He knew many criminals from the Los Angeles area and was a father figure and mentor to Cheyenne Cadena, but actually was only a made MA member in the late 1960s. He was not an original member, as many people think. By the 1960s, the MA had taken over many prison yards, including San Quentin, and so CDC sent many of these offenders to Folsom Prison, which was known as a lifer institution and where older convicts were housed. And this is where this famous photo was taken, with Joe Morgan standing behind Cheyenne Cadena. While Morgan did not start the MA's relationship with the Aryan Brotherhood, he definitely strengthened it. I've heard some dismiss Joe's ties to the AB, but these pictures tell a different story. Morgan maintained his ties on the street to the Aryan Brotherhood, as well as Mexican drug trafficking organizations, even one that the mayor of Tijuana was said to be involved in, and was connected to a little-known AB affiliate, a major drug dealer named Slim Center, who was well known to Frog Valdez, who was involved in the shoe war. Per my mentor, Robert Mocha Morel, who personally tracked Morgan and arrested him 3 times, he had ties to drug kingpin Harry Gamboa Buckley in Baja California, Mexico. Some people claim that Morgan slept on the floors of garages, basically saying he was a bum. But while he was no millionaire, he always dressed sharp and just tried to keep a low profile, as he knew the cops were always on his trail. So he stayed at many safe houses, where he slept on couches or in the garage. He always had money stashes with close contacts and always had plenty of dope, but mostly a lot of people owed him favors, and he always kept those in the bank and in his back pocket. Morgan was given the honorary title of Godfather or Padrino when he was acting with these drug cartels. This was bestowed upon him by none other than Rodolfo Cheyenne Cadena, according to Morel. Morgan paroled again in 1972 and a suspect in several homicides, but witnesses were always fearful of coming forward to identify one of the most powerful criminals in L.A. And other Mexican Mafia members often took the rap for Joe, as they were told he was too important to be locked up. Current criminal defense expert, witness, and past San Quentin warden and 1970s parole agent Danny Vasquez called Joe Morgan very dangerous and cunning, but said he was always polite with law enforcement, and I found the same when I dealt with him many years later. He had no qualms about having fellow criminals killed, as he looked at that good for business, like a corporate takeover. Morgan killed fellow Emero Richard Grumpy Garcia and took his living girlfriend as his wife. Jody Gibbs was very loyal to Morgan after Garcia was killed. Morgan also used his wits and charm in conjunction with Cheyenne Cadena to take over drug rehab programs with fellow Mexican Mafia members. In July 1977, Morgan was captured in California after buying a gun from Utah and traveling to several areas, including Oregon. A charge of interstate trafficking in firearms was added to narcotics and fugitive warrants he was already facing. And several Mexican Mafia members testified against him, and this was enough to bring federal BOP time, where he was close to California Aryan Brotherhood, as is shown here, just as he was in CDC. On May 10, 1992, Joe Morgan arrived at New Folsom Prison A5 building, which was the violence control unit where I worked, as a result of some old cases, and was escorted into the facility by me. I asked him about the movie American Me that was being made and asked if he got paid money for the film, but he was not amused and replied, "No, that's all right, but it will be taken care of." I stopped questioning him after that, as I could see he didn't want to talk about it. In 1993, Morgan's wife Jody filed a $500,000 lawsuit against the film's maker, Edward James Olmos. In the movie American Me, Morgan is portrayed by actor William Forsythe as the character JD. Many of the guards in that movie were actually played by real correction officers. Many of them were my friends. And many of the inmate extras were real inmates. So a lot of times the tower officers didn't know who was actors and who was real convicts, which was pretty stressful, they told me. Everybody I talked to said that Forsythe nailed Joe Morgan's character. He could speak Calo, Chicano slang, and fluent Spanish. In fact, I remember he was celled up with a Mexican national when I put him in the violence control unit. He was widely respected, though, in the unit. Now, I've heard a lot of people take credit for the Emmy Edict, but in my opinion, this came from Joe, as I personally heard convicts in the tier complain about Joe's new rules and protested about any kind of peace amongst the barrios because Raza are always going to fight in regards to the unification efforts. Emmy leaders like Peter Sano Ojeda and Ernest Chuco Castro are credited with arranging Sureño 13 gang meetings, but I'm pretty sure none of that would have happened without Joe's approval. Although there is no number one in the organization, he usually had the final say so in the final vote on such important matters. The rules, the Emmy Edict stated that there would be no more drive-bys in the barrios. If you had to handle business, do walk-ups to avoid hurting innocent civilians. They also purged any black sureños, although some gangs like 18th Street were given a pass over this issue after they were put on a green light list and protested. The edict also had rules about taxing sureños in control of various canales. Black Dam Barella and Wedo Shai Shyrock are also mentioned as supporting these rules and putting them into effect. In late October 1993, Papa Joe was transferred down from Pelican Bay and died of liver cancer in November 1993 while incarcerated at Corcoran Prison. There have been many influential Mexican Mafia members and heavyweights over the years, but very few people can say that they had the kind of power that Morgan had, and maybe never will again. Rafael Chispas Sandoval was born on January 9th, 1941, and came from El Hoyo Maravilla. He is documented as being one of the very first MA members to be recruited by Güero But Flores, the founder. And I actually met him in his elder years at Tony Casa's house, and we talked several times. He was also a ghostwriter for my mentor, Robert Moco Morel, for his book on the Mexican Mafia. Many people pegged Chispas as being the number 2, possibly number 3 guy after Joe Morgan, with Robert Robot Salas possibly competing for that number 2 or number 3 spot. Chispas ran a 1970s ex-convict Pinto program that was funded by the government named Community Concern Corporation. As with Mike Delia's Get Going project, Sandoval's program had political support. Morel, as head of the California Gang Task Force, exposed Sandoval's operation, but it was not until the Get Going project started to catch heat over the death of Elian Delia that people started to listen. Morel was present when Sandoval's project, located on 2411 North Broadway, was closed, as were a couple members from LAPD. They were happy to take down one of the Mexican Mafia's strongholds, but they knew that that was not the end of La M. Chispas was very close to guys like Aryan Brotherhood associate and writer and actor Eddie Bunker, as well as ex-con Danny Trejo, who was never a Mexican Mafia member, but was an associate of them. It was around 2002 that Morel met his former enemy Chispas in a Denny's restaurant in Newport Beach, California. He was very leery at first for good reasons. Chispas knew who Morel was, and even Morel's police chief boss told him that was a real bad idea, and that Chispas could very easily have him murdered. But Morel felt intrigued with this man he started pursuing as a criminal over his career, and they cleared the air about some things that happened in the past, which gave Morel the idea to write his book. And all through it, I helped Morel edit it. Now, I got to say, Moco grew up in Hazard in the Ramona Gardens project, and I told him he wrote like a Chicano. He would say the car that is red instead of the red car. El carro rojo in Spanish, and we both laughed. But in spite of some people's criticism, it's a pretty good book. And he also wrote an even more detailed book about what happened with Mike Delia and Alfie Sosa in the traffic stop. A lot of law enforcement never trusted Chispa since he never debriefed. La M was supposed to be a blood-in, blood-out organization, and the only way to get out was supposed to be to die. But I know many members who turned Christian, and as long as they lived up to the word and didn't use drugs and didn't commit crimes or get involved in MA business, they were left alone. Another gang worker I personally know that knew Chispas since the 1960s commented, Chispas was very smart, a very hardcore member of El Hoyo Maravilla, and joined the Mexican Mafia in the early days, and quickly made his mark as a feared leader and killer. But he changed his life in the 1980s and became a Christian. He spent the rest of his life trying to help his fellow ex-prisoners get out of the lifestyle. For sure, Chispas had his secrets, but he repented before God. Thus, he felt no need to do more before any gang task force, not even Moco. And so he took many of his secrets to the grave in early 2008. Robert Robot, a.k.a. Super Bean Salas, was another Mexican Mafia member who has to be considered among the top 5 emeros. He was born on April 6, 1944, and caught polio as a youngster, which gave him a very obvious limp, which made him walk like a robot, thus his moniker. Salas grew up in Romana Gardens, Hazard Barrio, but was a little bit younger than Robert Mocha Morel. Salas was considered to be very Americanized. He dressed very GQ and considered himself a ladies' man. Salas was a strategy thinker, but could also be a killer when he wanted to, and thus was involved in some of the killings and stabbings in the Shoe War in the early days of the Mexican Mafia and started the Shoe War. First, he killed Sonny Pena, who was from New Mexico but also claimed Maravilla when he moved to the East LA area. Next, he went after Hector Mad Dog Padilla, who, as author Robert Morel notes, was not named Poodle. Padilla was a double murderer and a very good fighter. But he was drunk when he had his confrontation with Salas and was gravely wounded, as was his cellie, Benito Romero, who was also from Maravilla. Not being satisfied with just wounding Romero, Salas later finished him off in the streets in 1976. And I'm sure Mad Dog Padilla was always looking over his shoulder for a robot. Salas was paroled from Folsom Prison in 1975. When Morgan was arrested in 1977, Salas quickly moved in to fill the void of being the main Mexican Mafia heroin supplier on the streets of Southern California. During this time period, he settled personal scores and had many people killed, including fellow Mexican Mafia members. He also had connections to judges and organized crime figures. Salas also married a very lovely Patricia Patty Dominguez, who worked in the criminal justice system. Salas gave Dominguez an Aztec code name of Quilatzli, which is considered a fertility goddess by the Aztecs. Dominguez eventually divorced him. Salas also dated Rita Rangel, who ran the Narcotics Prevention Project in East LA and was with other influential figures and programs. When Salas was released from prison on November 19, 1998, he was soon allegedly popped for a sizable amount of dope, but the charges were dropped. Now, I've never seen any real proof of this, but like many before him, maybe he saw this as an act of God. He ended up joining Victory Outreach and is seen in this picture with many other former Mexican Mafia heavyweights. He died in November 2004 in the San Gabriel Valley, reportedly with Rita Rangel being at his side. Now, if Robot was on the green light list by La M, they easily could have got him. He was often seen out and about with other guys from VO. When Moco and I spoke with Chispas after Robot was released, he never mentioned that Salas' life was in danger. So I don't know about that no good list that some people put Salas on. Sometimes people have ulterior motives for what they say and do. But I don't think that Robot was a sleeper either. Again, as long as you don't tell any major secrets and remain a legit Christian, it appears Lamb will give you a pass from their blood in, blood out oath. That concludes Part 1. Top 10 California Mexican Mafia members of all time. Part 2 will follow soon on this channel. Thanks for watching.